Okay, in this lecture, we're going to talk about the internal parasites. And, it's important to remember that these animals live outdoors, and even we're exposed to it. We don't want to think about it, but we're exposed to parasites all the time. And these animals, horses, donkeys, and mules, they're always exposed to parasites in this environment. So what we have is, a system of deworming to actually limit the parasite load in the animal and to limit any negative effects on health. And you can see, this picture has always made me kind of just cringe, thinking about all the grass I've picked up in my life and kind of gnawed on as I've walked around fields and stuff. But this is just a water droplet in between two blades of grass, and you can see all these nice, nasty little bugs in there. So I wonder how many people after watching this lecture will never lick moisture off grass again when you see something like that. But just realize, it's part of life. We have bugs on us. We have bugs in us. It's just the microscopic world's there. But these are some of the bugs that we don't want to have and we don't want our animals to have. And so the internal parasites are parasites that live in or can live on the host, but typically are internal to them. And then in our next lecture, we're going to talk about external parasites, but they either live on or actually suck the blood of the animal, derive their food from the host animal. So with the internal parasites, these are the ones that we're going to cover. And again, I'll go back to my advice. You're going to hear it all week. Is what affects your region of the world. Even in the United States, there's different worms here in Florida than there are worms in Wisconsin or Washington State or California, Texas, and everywhere in between. Oh, don't forget Maine. Okay, I'll see you guys up there too. So all throughout the country we have different parasites, but these are typical ones that affect all equids. So we'll cover them, but ask your health professional, what's the most common parasites around here? What are the ones I should be worried about? Now, I'll start off with the worst one of the worst ones, and that's the strongyles, and we call these bloodworms. Now, there's two types. There's the large and the small, and the large we're not quite as worried about anymore, but the smalls are really tough to deal with. They're really tough to get rid of, which we'll talk about here in a second. So the life cycle of strongyles lasts anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks, so pretty long, up to 3 months. And we'll start here with their life cycle with the eggs. So the eggs are in the soil or in the pasture, and they develop into larvae right here. Okay, and then the horse comes around and eats the larvae and then ingests that. Well, once these worms get in there, they migrate in the tissues and they mature, and then they'll lay their eggs in the digestive tract, and the eggs are deposited in the feces on the soil. And then this cycle repeats itself over and over and over. So it's a life cycle of these worms. Now, what's kind of scary about these and where they get the term bloodworm is they actually migrate through the blood vessels. So they don't just stick in the digestive tract. They actually go through many tissues. So they can affect the intestines, obviously you see the blood vessels, the liver, the pancreas. They can actually get into muscles because they're in that circulatory system. So with that, they can actually lead to blood clots or aneurysms, where even those vessels can burst. Now, the small strongyles we're finding out are actually more difficult to control because they tend to stick in the large intestine, and they stick to the intestinal wall, and they become encysted. And so you get all these encysted small strongyles that are somewhat resistant to some of our dewormers, and you can't get rid of them. So they're really tough, and then they obviously disturb any nutrient absorption because you have these worms and the horse can't absorb any nutrients. So it leads to some of these things that we'll talk about, with what it looks like when a horse is heavily infested with parasites. Now the next one is the roundworm. It's hard to have energy talking about these nasty things, but anyways, the ascarids or the roundworms, they have again similar life cycle. We start with eggs in the feces. They develop into larvae. The horse comes around, ingests that. Now, where this differs is, gets into the small intestine and then migrates to the liver, and then they'll migrate to the lungs. So then the horse is going to cough like that, swallow, yummy, and they actually migrate and get the worms back into their intestinal tract. So it's part of their life cycle, and then they get into, in the intestine, and they mature and reproduce, deposit eggs that go out in the feces. So that's the life cycle of them. That's one of the things we talk about. If a horse is coughing quite a bit, it could be, a parasite infection. Now, the good thing about this worm, if there's anything good about it, but middle-aged horses tend to develop immunity against them. So they tend not to be as bothered by than, say, the younger or older horses when their immune systems are relatively young, or when they're waning in life. They can tend to be more prone to an infection with this. Now, these are the worms that any of the worms we're worried about, but these ones can lead to impaction colic. So you get a pretty heavy build of these worms in the intestines, and they get blocked, or they can get a toxicity with too many worms in their tract. And unfortunately, they're a little resistant to the environment. So, if you have a cool spell or a dry spell or a heat spell, it tends not to kill them. Really, it has to be a persistent cold spell or heat spell. Now, the next fun parasite to talk about is the tapeworm. And these guys are pretty scary looking too. And their eggs, I'll start here in the body, actually are part of a segment of their body. So that segment breaks off and then gets here in the soil and deposits its eggs there. Now, what comes along is a little mite, and it will actually eat the egg. And then as the horse grazes, it actually eats the mite, which has those immature tapeworms in there. So now the horse is infected because these mites are in its digestive tract. These worms get out, and they develop into adult tapeworms, and they hook on, and then they grow, and they become these nasty tapeworms that you can see in this segmented body, all the way through. You can see through that intestinal tract. And again, they repeat the cycle. They get those eggs in that segment of the body, breaks off, goes back into the soil, mites come along, eat the eggs, horse eats the mite, starts all over again. So with these, what you're really concerned with is, again, you can get colic, but also this poor growth, this disruption to nutrient absorption, this disruption to competing for nutrients with the worm, and the horse actually is missing out on a lot of nutrients in its diet, so it starts to lose weight, lose body condition, and it's not a good thing. So, all right, and then pinworms, I bring these up because, their life cycle is pretty simple. You can see it's up to 5 months. Basically, the horse eats the eggs get in the intestinal tract, and you repeat the cycle. It's almost like ascaris. It doesn't migrate to the lungs, just kind of sticks to the digestive tract. Why I bring up pinworms is because I can only imagine how these drive horses and other equids nuts, because they typically live in the colon, and they're non-damaging, so they're really not damaging any of the tissues in the animal. But what is particularly gruesome about these is the female worm actually migrates out the rectum, lays her eggs on the rectum, and that's going to drive your animal nuts because it really irritates and causes them to itch. So what you'll see is, animals will be rubbing their bums or their tails quite a bit, and they'll rub off some of the hair, they'll rub off some of the tail hair, they get what we call a ratty tail, looks pretty disgusting, and they have these pinworms that are just driving them nuts. So always want to make sure you treat for those. Now, the next fun one is the bot, and I kind of saved the best for last, I guess. These insects, I'll start the life cycle with the bot fly. So this is what it actually looks like. Okay, and they buzz around your horse, and they're going to lay a bunch of eggs around the animal. There's different species of bot flies, so the eggs look different, but that's typically what they look like. So they'll lay their eggs on the horse, and generally in an area where the horse grooms themselves. So you'll tend to see them on the lower limbs, on a lot of horses, the ones that I've seen. And the horse will lick or at some point rub its nose against that, and they'll pick up the eggs into the mouth. Okay, and then so these eggs will develop into larvae or bot larvae in the horse, and these you can't quite see it here, but it's 8 to 10 months they can live within the horse. So in this larval stage. Then these will detach and go out in the feces, go out on the ground as these pupae, get in the soil, and then they'll emerge as the bot fly, go back around, lay their eggs, and start the cycle all over again. So really kind of a nasty little critter. So you can see here on this picture, this is, using a botfly knife, or, where they go and scrape off those eggs. So that's really what you're looking for. And you can typically see this on quite a lot of animals. And you can see they affect the stomach and the intestines, and they can really lay dormant. But again, they're competing with the the nutrition with the horse, because they're consuming some of the nutrients. It can lead to things like ulcers, lesions, and then some of these summer sores where they have heavy infestation of the eggs. So some problems with the bots. So here's a kind of a list of some of the things you can look for to see if you have a parasitic infection. Again, the animal's not going to look well, and really, this image here, this horse just does not look healthy. It's a poor coat, skinny, just not in good condition, and obviously, especially in these animals that are not taken care of well, they're not dewormed, they're not fed properly. You can tell they probably have a lot of parasites and a lot of problems. So you can see some of that, the emaciated horses, and then the pot belly. Here in this horse, this is a pot belly. It's not a pregnant horse, it's actually a pot belly. And you can see that horse is really skinny and then has like this large belly, so just infested with parasites. So it's not a pretty picture. It's not a good thing. But the good news is we do practice parasite control, so that's why we keep these animals healthy. So that's why we prevent seeing those things. So some of the things you want to do is obviously keep your manure, remove it routinely, and manage your pastures properly. So if you go back to last week, we talked about spreading manure on pastures. You want to make sure if you do spread manure, you're not doing it on one that's currently being grazed. Allow the environment to get at those feces to kill off some of these bugs. Make sure you're feeding clean water and hay and feed. You can do fecal egg counts. You can either go online and look how to do that on your own, or you can have your health professional do that for you. And then deworming is critical to parasite control. So you need to have a good deworming plan. And so we're going to jump into this and talk about how you should approach deworming with your horses. Now, it's important to remember not all dewormers will cover all the parasites. So you can't just go to the store or wherever you can, order it off the internet or wherever in your country where they sell it, and go, oh, just give me a horse dewormer. They give you a tube of paste. You go out, deworm your horse, you're done. Well, you need to know what you gave them, what that treat's for. Is it even the time of year for those type of parasites? So it's really, really critical that you know what you're giving. You just can't give a dewormer and understand that your animal's going to be healthy. All right, so looking at this table of dewormers, and one that's really, really popular is this combo product with ivermectin. And you can see it treats almost all of the ones we're concerned with, all the parasites we're concerned with. But the thing is, we can't just be given the same dewormer every couple months, every 6 to 8 weeks. Because what we're finding is these worms are developing parasitic resistance. So going back to our very first lecture, when we're talking about evolution, if you go in and your dewormer kills 98% of the bugs, 2% of those bugs are still alive because they're naturally resistant to that product. Well, eventually that 2% will start reproducing, and the next time you go, maybe you only kill 96% and 90% and then 80%. And then pretty soon you're giving this dewormer and you're only killing half the worms and you're not doing anything. And we're seeing this with our older products. These worms are developing resistance to certain products. So what you want to do is rotate the types of dewormer you use, and we're really slowing down that resistance buildup. So it's very, very critical that you do that. Now again, here's another table showing you the different products, and in this one has some of the commercial products that you would find with some of these dewormers. Now, these may not be the same throughout the world. The classes of dewormers are pretty uniform across the world. The products associated with them may not be the same, but you can see that here in another representation of what they treat and what worms they treat. Now, again, you have to ask your health professional what worms are prevalent in our area of the world, and in what season are they prevalent. So, I can't answer that for you. but you can ask them and they'll be able to do that. But here is a table that's going to kind of show you generally what worms, what parasites are high at what times of year. So here in Florida, we're entering spring, summer, while we're recording these today. So roundworms and tapeworms are really our two big concerns right now, heading into summer. So here's some of the products we could use to treat those worms, okay? And then going into autumn, fall, bots become more of a concern, and then we start getting these strongyles is a big concern. So that's when we'll tend to treat or choose dewormers for those times of year that will treat those types of worms. So it's very, very critical that you have a deworming plan. And this week's assignment, we'll kind of pencil out a quick, easy deworming plan for your animal. Now, in the next lecture, we're going to start jumping into external parasites, the good old flies, ticks, and mites and lice and all that fun stuff. So I'll see you then.